It happened on the evening of Marcus's corporate celebration, one of those carefully orchestrated gatherings where practiced smiles meet measured conversation over canapés and Prosecco. I'd spent the afternoon preparing, primarily ensuring Marcus wouldn't confuse anyone's name or professional title. He's wonderfully warm, though remembering fine details has never been his strongest quality. Our home looked luminous beneath strands of fairy lights, with notes of cinnamon and citrus drifting through the rooms, creating an ambiance that felt welcoming rather than formal. Guests arrived in waves throughout the evening, their voices blending with the soft jazz playing in the background. I was replenishing the drink station when James approached. He carries himself with quiet authority, the kind of person who observes deeply before speaking, understanding nuances most people miss. Silver hair that catches the light, perceptive eyes, an understated confidence that naturally commands respect without ever demanding it. "You've created something remarkable here," he said, raising his glass toward me. I smiled, gesturing toward an animated group debating playlist choices near the speakers. "We'll see if everyone agrees after they try my sangria recipe." His laugh was genuine, unforced, the kind that reaches the eyes. As midnight approached, guests began their gradual exodus. Marcus had stepped upstairs briefly. When the final visitor departed, James remained, not awkwardly, simply unexpectedly. The music had softened to barely audible. The house settled into its nighttime stillness. "Do you ever grow weary of being everyone's foundation?" he asked suddenly, his tone carrying unexpected weight. The question held depth, coming from someone who clearly understood the burden of responsibility. I hesitated, then found myself being honest. Sometimes. Taking care of everyone else means I don't have to examine my own needs too carefully. He nodded slowly, truly absorbing my words rather than simply waiting for his turn to speak. "Marcus is fortunate," he said. "Not just tonight, always. You bring equilibrium to everything around you." That surprised me. It wasn't flattery exactly, but recognition, and being truly seen felt both intimate and strangely unfamiliar. Marcus returned then, and James stood graciously, thanking us for the evening. Before leaving, he glanced at me with a subtle, knowing expression. Not romantic, simply aware. Something unspoken had passed between us, and I felt it clearly. After he left, I moved through the quiet house, surrounded by empty glasses and lingering fragrances. The evening seemed ordinary on the surface, yet somehow fundamentally different. Later, lying beside Marcus in bed, that conversation replayed in my mind, not for scandalous reasons, but because it made me feel noticed in ways I hadn't experienced in years. James had looked at me as though my story still contained unwritten chapters. It was a strangely comforting realization. Morning arrived with unusual stillness, as though the house itself was contemplating something. Marcus left early for meetings, leaving me with coffee and rare solitude. Sunlight streamed across the hardwood floors as I reflected on the previous evening. James's words had awakened something dormant. My desire to be recognized not just for orchestrating everything but for who I was beneath those roles. Mid-morning my phone rang. Seeing James's name made my pulse quicken unexpectedly. I answered with hesitation. "Hello?" "Good morning," his voice was calm, steady. "I hope this isn't presumptuous. I wanted to express again how much I valued our conversation last night." "Not at all," I replied, feeling oddly breathless. "It was lovely." A weighted pause followed. "I was hoping we might continue talking. Somewhere quieter, if you're comfortable with that." I felt both drawn forward and held back. This was Marcus's colleague, someone I'd always viewed through a professional lens. "I suppose that could work," I said carefully. "Where did you have in mind?" "There's a small cafe nearby, relaxed, comfortable, nothing formal or awkward, I promise." After hanging up, my thoughts swirled. A simple coffee meeting felt loaded with possibility. Yet the prospect of talking with someone who truly listened felt intoxicating. At the cafe, James arrived moments before me, sunlight catching the silver in his hair. That same subtle smile, recognition without judgment. We claimed a table by the window, watching pedestrians pass, beginning with everyday topics. Neighborhoods, seasonal changes, daily observations. Gradually, the conversation deepened. He asked about my childhood interests, dreams I hadn't voiced in decades. No pressure, no expectations, just genuine curiosity. Between sips of coffee, I realized I hadn't felt this understood in years, not through polite compliments or routine exchanges, but truly seen by someone who leaned in, listened, and cared without judgment. Leaving brought unexpected reluctance, a quiet sadness that our exchange had ended. Yet clarity emerged too. James had reminded me I could still be curious, still explore who I was, still connect deeply without changing anything about my life with Marcus. Home again, I mentioned my afternoon errands to Marcus. He smiled, unsuspecting, asking if I'd enjoyed myself. I realized I didn't need to hide feeling alive again, just alive in a subtly different, more awakened way. Something had shifted quietly, and I sensed the coming days might hold more unexpected moments that would challenge yet honor the life I'd built. Days passed, but the feeling lingered. It wasn't just James. It was how he listened, noticing things even Marcus hadn't acknowledged lately. I found myself smiling at small moments, humming while doing household tasks, savoring quiet morning tea. Marcus noticed, asking if something was on my mind. I deflected gently, not ready to articulate what I was discovering. Some realizations I understood were mine alone. Then one evening, Marcus worked late again. I was straightening the living room when someone knocked. My heart jumped. I wasn't expecting anyone. Opening the door, I found James holding fresh sunflowers. "I hope this isn't intrusive," he said steadily. I thought perhaps we could walk briefly. The weather's beautiful, and I promised myself I wouldn't let another day pass without saying hello. His sincerity made refusing impossible. We walked quiet streets near my home, the sky fading to soft lavender and gold. The neighborhood felt different at that hour, almost intimate, as though the world had contracted to just us. We discussed ordinary things again: weather, old oak trees, childhood summer memories. But somewhere between words, the conversation deepened, becoming more personal and reflective. He asked what I loved most about my life. I answered honestly: overlooked moments, laughter shared with Marcus, simple pleasures of home. "And yet," he said softly, "something in your expression wants more. Not more life itself, but more of noticing life for yourself, not just through others." His words lingered as we walked. No pressure, no urgency, just quiet understanding. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about obligations. I was thinking about who I was, what I felt, what I wanted to explore. Returning home under soft streetlight glow, James thanked me and left. I stood at the door with unexpected clarity. My marriage with Marcus remained precious and loving, but I could also embrace dormant parts of myself. Curiosity, wonder, the desire to be known beyond my roles. That night, beside Marcus, I felt a gentle awakening, not betrayal or secret longing, simply being fully present with my own heart, discovering I could hold love and curiosity simultaneously. Life could contain both stability and surprise. Meaningful connections could happen in quiet, unexpected ways. This discovery was mine alone to cherish, without compromising the love Marcus and I shared. The following weeks felt different, though daily life remained unchanged. Marcus continued his routines. Still kind, still loving, still my center. Yet beneath it all, I carried the quiet self-awareness James had awakened. A sense I'd nearly forgotten existed. One evening, Marcus came home early. The house smelled of dinner I'd prepared, soft music playing from the kitchen speaker. He embraced me, tired but smiling. I felt everything familiar, everything steady. Later on the porch with tea, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant coral and amber, I realized how much I'd grown in just weeks. Not dramatically, but quietly, profoundly. Being fully seen didn't threaten my life. It enhanced it. James's presence had been a mirror reflecting neglected parts of myself. Curiosity, joy, willingness to be noticed for who I really was, not just what I provided. Our interactions, though brief, reminded me life still held surprises. That emotional connection didn't require sacrifice or betrayal. I thought about our conversations, the walk beneath streetlights, coffee at the quiet cafe, shared laughter over ordinary things. Each memory wove me back to myself, unexpectedly but completely. That night, Marcus and I talked late about work, friends, silly, overlooked things. Between laughter and stories, I realized I could hold these new experiences without altering my love for him. Love wasn't diminished by curiosity or emotional awaken. They could coexist, each enriching the other. Lying in bed, I felt peace I hadn't known in years. Life had reminded me that growth happens quietly, through small moments of understanding and connection. James hadn't disrupted my life. He'd simply illuminated it, gently, without expectation or demand. I knew now I could carry this lesson forward. I mattered too. My feelings, my curiosity, my need to be seen, they were valid. Life could be richer when we allow ourselves to truly see and be seen. The party, the coffee, the walk. Small moments that left indelible marks. Not because they changed my marriage, but because they helped me reclaim myself in a world that often forgets the quiet power of noticing, listening, and connecting. Closing my eyes, I felt gratitude. For Marcus, for James, for the unexpected ways life reminded me that growth and love could exist side by side, each making the other brighter. 3 months later, the seasons had shifted. Autumn had painted our neighborhood in shades of rust and gold, and with the changing leaves came subtle changes in me, changes that had taken root during those conversations with James and continued to grow quietly in the months since. I hadn't seen James in weeks. His project with Marcus's company had concluded, and he'd moved on to other ventures. We'd exchanged a few brief messages. Nothing inappropriate, just friendly acknowledgments of our conversations and their impact. He'd thanked me for helping him remember the importance of truly listening. I'd thanked him for seeing me, and then we'd let it rest there, beautifully incomplete but perfectly resolved. What remained was the transformation he'd catalyzed. I'd begun painting again, something I hadn't done since before my marriage. Small watercolors at first, tentative explorations of color and form. Marcus had been surprised but supportive, clearing space in the spare row. For an easel. I didn't know you painted, he'd said, watching me arrange supplies. I'd forgotten I did, I replied honestly. That conversation had opened others. Over dinner one evening, I'd told Marcus about feeling invisible sometimes, about needing to be seen not just as his partner or the household manager, but as myself. He'd been quiet, processing, then reached across the table for my hand. I'm sorry, he'd said. I've been so focused on work, on routine, I stopped really looking at you. That's not okay. It wasn't a dramatic moment, no tears, no grand declarations, just honesty and the willingness to do better. We'd started taking evening walks together, the kind James and I had taken that one twilight evening. Marcus asked questions he'd never thought to ask before. What I dreamed about, what I missed from my younger years, what I wanted our future to look like. I discovered he'd been feeling disconnected too, trapped in roles and routines, wondering if he'd become boring or predictable. We'd both been lonely in parallel, neither knowing how to bridge the gap. James's arrival in my life had been a catalyst, but Marcus's willingness to listen and grow, that was what actually transformed our marriage. One afternoon in early November, I was in my painting room when the doorbell rang. Opening it, I found a package, a small box with my name written in familiar handwriting. Inside was a book, a collection of poetry about awakening and self-discovery, with a brief note tucked inside for reminding me that true connection requires presence. Thank you for the gift of being seen. May you always remember you matter. James, I smiled, touched by the gesture. It wasn't romantic, it was acknowledgement, closure, gratitude. That evening I showed the book to Marcus, along with the note. I'd thought briefly about hiding it, but realized that would betray the very honesty I'd been cultivating. Marcus read the note, then looked at me thoughtfully. He saw something in you I'd stopped noticing, he said quietly. I'm grateful to him for that, and I'm sorry you had to find that recognition elsewhere. You're seeing it now, I replied. That's what matters. He pulled me close, and in that embrace I felt both the stability of our long history and the exciting possibility of our future, a future where we both remained curious about each other, where we continued to truly see one another. 6 months later, spring arrived with its usual burst of renewal. The garden I'd neglected for years had become a project Marcus and I worked on together, planning flower beds and discussing the metaphorical significance of growth and cultivation. My paintings had evolved from tentative watercolors to bolder acrylics. I'd even sold a few through a local gallery, not for the money, but for the validation that my voice, my vision mattered beyond the walls of my home. Marcus had made changes too. He'd stepped back from some professional commitments, prioritizing balance over advancement. We'd started hosting smaller, more intimate gatherings, the kind where real conversation happened, where people were seen. One evening, we were preparing for one such gathering when Marcus said, "Do you ever think about James?" The question surprised me with its directness. Sometimes, I admitted, not in the way you might think. I think about what he represented, the reminder that I was still here, still worthy of attention and curiosity. Marcus nodded. I understand. I think about him sometimes too, about how close I came to losing you, not to him but to my own neglect. You didn't lose me, I said softly, but you might have, eventually. We might have lost each other, but we didn't, he said, pulling me into a dance though no music was playing. We found each other again. Instead. That's the story I want to remember. I rested my head against his shoulder, feeling grateful for this second awakening, the one that happened within my marriage, the one built on honesty and recommitment. As guests arrived that evening, I moved through the gathering differently than I had at that corporate party months ago. I was still attentive, still making sure everyone felt welcome, but I was also present as myself, sharing my opinions, laughing freely, existing as more than just the hostess. At one point, I caught my reflection in the window, and the woman looking back at me was vibrant, engaged, alive. Not because of anyone else, but because I'd chosen to be fully present in my own life. 1 year later, the anniversary of that corporate celebration arrived, and Marcus suggested we host another gathering. But smaller this time, more intentional. As I prepared, I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago. Competent, caring, but somehow invisible even to herself. That woman had needed someone like James to hold up a mirror, to reflect back her worth. But the woman I was now had learned to see herself clearly without external validation. James wasn't invited to this gathering, not out of avoidance, but because that chapter had naturally closed. He'd been exactly what I needed when I needed it. A reminder, a catalyst, a gentle awakening. As guests arrived, real friends, people we connected with deeply, Marcus squeezed my hand. "Thank you," he said. "For what? For fighting for us. For not settling for the distant, routine version of our marriage. For teaching me that love requires presence." I smiled, feeling tears prick my eyes. "Thank you for being willing to wake up with me." The evening unfolded with genuine laughter, meaningful conversations, and the kind of connection that nourishes rather than depletes. At one point, someone asked me about my painting, and I spoke about it with passion, with pride. Marcus beamed, clearly delighted by my enthusiasm. Later, he pulled me aside and said, "This is who I fell in love with all those years ago, before life got routine, before we forgot to really see each other. I'm so glad she's back." "She never left," I replied. "She was just sleeping. And you helped wake her up. Truly, deeply wake her up." Because that was the truth. James had shown me I'd been dormant, but Marcus had been willing to help me bloom. That made all the difference, the essential truth. As I reflect on that transformative year, I understand now what really happened. James didn't awaken me, he reminded me I'd been asleep. The actual awakening happened. Added in the choices that followed, choosing honesty with Marcus, choosing to reclaim my interests, choosing to exist as a full person rather than just a role. Sometimes we need outside mirrors to see ourselves clearly, but the real transformation happens when we take what we've learned and bring it back to our primary relationships, when we choose vulnerability and honesty over comfort and routine. My marriage didn't survive despite my connection with James. It thrived because of what that connection revealed, that I was hungry for depth, for being seen, for mattering. And when I finally articulated that hunger to Marcus, he heard me. He chose to meet me there. Not all stories end this way. Sometimes the awakening leads elsewhere, and that's valid too. But for me, the gift was discovering that the life I had could become the life I needed, if I was brave enough to ask for it, to claim it, to show up fully as myself. Epilogue. 2 years after that corporate celebration, I stood in a small gallery at the opening of my first solo exhibition. The paintings told a story of dormancy and awakening, of being lost and found, of the quiet courage it takes to truly see yourself. Marcus stood beside me, proud and present. Several pieces were inspired by him, not the version of him from our routine years, but the man he'd become when he chose to really look, to really listen, to really love. One painting hung in the center of the exhibit. It was called The Catalyst, abstract forms in silver and gold, representing fleeting but transformative connections. It was my tribute to James, to that unexpected mirror he'd held up, to the gift of being seen at exactly the right moment. A young woman approached me, studying the painting. "What does it mean?" she asked. I smiled. "It's about the people who remind us we're still here, the ones who see us when we've become invisible to ourselves. I don't have to stay in our lives forever. Sometimes they're just meant to reflect back our worth long enough for us to remember it ourselves." She nodded thoughtfully, and I saw something in her expression. Recognition, perhaps, of her own dormancy, her own hunger to be seen. As she walked away, Marcus slipped his hand into mine. "You've become quite the philosopher," he said with gentle teasing. "I've just learned to pay attention," I replied. "To myself, to you, to the moments that matter." "I'm glad," he said. "I'm glad you woke up. I'm glad you woke me up too." We stood there together, surrounded by my paintings, by the physical evidence of transformation. And I felt profound gratitude for James and the mirror he'd held, for Marcus and his willingness to look into it with me, and for myself, for having the courage to actually see what was reflected back. Because that's what awakening really is, not a destination, but a choice. A daily decision to show up fully, to be seen completely, to love honestly. And it's a choice I make every single day.